without further ado, let me bring us to the event at hand. You guys all came to witness a panel on the evolution of HR. It's a topic that's really important to us. Clearly, the role of HR has changed dramatically, certainly in the last 20 years, but even in the last 5 or 10 years. So we put together a pretty amazing panel tonight to talk about how has that change manifest in various types of organizations, and where is that likely to manifest going forward. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to our panel. Please join us up on stage. Now I've got my hands full with this mic. So to begin, while I get myself situated, I'd like each one of you just to introduce yourselves, tell us a little bit about your organization and your role in the organization.
Do you want me to start?
Please.
Okay. I'm Namrata Yadav. I think it's working. I head Diversity and Inclusion Learning and Development for Bank of America, along with the Inclusion Strategy and now the Millennial Strategy. So I'm pretty sure all of you have heard of Bank of America. We are 220,000 people, so it's not a small organization. So being in a role where I need to look at a strategy for like 220,000 people is not very exciting sometimes. But I've been there for almost 8 years, and I truly just love what I do.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Alyssa Beckman. I'm the head of talent and HR at Spot Hero. Very different from Bank of America. We are only about 130 people based in Chicago. We're an on-demand parking app that help connect people with parking spots. So we're very much a growing tech startup, which is where I've spent the majority of my career, all of my career, really growing out and building talent functions in small, growing startups. So like I mentioned, Spot Hero is about 130 people. We've doubled in size every year and been around for about 5 years, which is pretty amazing. And really, we're focused on culture and growth and helping people, I guess, learn and develop, because that's really important, as we found in today's day and age, is everybody that really wants to learn and grow and develop their career path. So that's something we're really focused on at Spot Hero.
Great. Hello. My name is Jorge Diaz. I'm the Global Head of Human Resources for Fleetmatics. And Fleetmatics is a software as a service company that sells software and solutions for companies with fleets and mobile workers. We went public in 2012 on the New York Stock Exchange. We have about 1,400 employees. We originally were founded in Ireland, and we were about to get acquired by Verizon. So this is kind of the whole startup through maturity through being bought by a big company. We'll see how that all works out. But exciting times. And interestingly enough, after we were acquired by Verizon, Fortune magazine announced us as one of the top 100 fastest growing companies on their list. So that was exciting. Certainly, we've seen a lot of evolution as we figure out how to take a startup company and grow it and mature and act like a company that can scale appropriately, and then ultimately be prepared and be of value to a large company that wants to come in and buy us at a significant premium, which certainly from an investment perspective is a good story. From an inside perspective, we'll see how it all goes, but anyway, happy to be here.
Congratulations on the acquisition. My name is Madan Nageldin. I'm the Chief People Officer for Context Media Health. A very interesting company at the intersection of healthcare, content, media, tech. So we're about 500 people in Chicago. We just doubled our headcount this year. And we're growing at a triple-digit kind of a rate. I usually tell the people that I hire, we're growing at a triple-digit top line, triple-digit bottom line, on a triple-digit base of revenue. So it's hopefully we'll get to the great stories like how you went public and all this amazing stuff in the years to come. We have 2 offices here in Chicago, which is the biggest office, about 350 plus people, or 400 people out here. New York, which is about 100 people there. What we do is a very interesting intersection of how you consume healthcare information when you sit in front of your physician and having those conversations. When you consume that information that was provided by us, the hardware, the software, the content, the programming, the customization, all of that gets produced over here in Chicago, and that gets delivered to over 25,000 doctors' offices every single day. And we're adding about 1% of US practices every single month. So we expect to be in about 70% of all US hospitals and practices in less than 2.5 years. So we're growing so rapidly, and I'm using this as a pitch for, look, we're hiring, please let us know. I got my great team out here, and thank you for having me out here.
You're good to hit on that. These do tend to be one of the greatest recruiting events ever. So typically there's always
Thank
somebody in
you.
the room who's hiring and always somebody who's maybe interested in a conversation. So I want to kick off with a little bit of discussion of the transformation that we've seen maybe in the last 5 or 10 years. I mean, we've clearly gone from the people organization or HR, whatever the name is, being a service center responsible for comp and ben, a lot of back office, to an organization that's becoming a lot more strategic. And it seems like every year there's a discussion that's going on in the community about one of our sacred cows potentially going away. I remember last year it was performance reviews. Do we even do them anymore? If so, why do we do them? And there was a whole controversy, if you want to call it that, in publications and meetings about that. But I'm curious at a higher level, and Alyssa, maybe we can start with you. How have you seen HR change over the last 5 years? And what are the big transformations that they manifest in your organization?
Sure. So again, as I mentioned, I've been in a little bit different, smaller tech startup. So I've been at 4 different ones, really to come in and build out and grow the talent function. And I think first of all, something really interesting that I thought of is just the name of the function purely. Like it used to be HR. Now I've had various titles like the head of talent, the head of people, the head of empowerment. So I think like even that is showing like the way I think it's being shifted in viewing. And I think it's even in the last 10 years, I've seen it grow from maybe a more reactive function. So more compliance focused, benefits, payroll, all of that good stuff. So now we are really shifting and focusing more on that, partnering with the different executives on the company to really focus on that learning and growth and development and career pathing and helping influence people's careers. So I think, of course, benefits is always going to be part of what we do, but it's been interesting to see that shift and how different companies and different cultures have really prioritized that piece of HR over the more, I guess, day-to-day administrative stuff. So I think from my perspective, that's been really interesting to see.
Well, you look like you have something to say. You've seen probably the HR function grow over years, but also as Fleetmatics has grown. So how has that changed in your org?
Sure. So interesting story. So I came into Fleetmatics 4.5 years ago, and I call it a startup at the time. The company was actually founded in 2004, but we were about 400 employees at the time. But finance owned HR, and there was one full-time person, and everybody else kind of managed. People were getting paid, and there were some benefits, but that's about it. So it was truly, truly an administrative function when it came in. I was hired because we were getting ready to go public. They wanted to kind of show to the public, facing population, that this is a grown-up HR organization, and that was my job to kind of get us there. And I will tell you, the transformation was quite significant just within the company, but I think it also correlates a lot of the changes we see in HR overall. So we had to do the basic stuff first. Right? At the end of the day, you have to make sure the trains run on time. You have to make sure that people are going to get what they need, and you have to have enough people to come. Right? So benefits are important for people to come and stay and so on, but that's not what's going to differentiate you as an employer. And so we went from building the basic foundation to truly ultimately getting to a point where the business leaders, and they had no experience with HR, especially the founders. They were like, well, why do we need HR? That's just going to slow us down. We're fast moving, we're innovative, and so on. And at the end of the day, one of the founders, who was kind of against hiring my role, was in my office more than anybody else because he saw the value in how the function helped in making decisions about developing people, about hiring the right kind of people, about creating systems and processes that ultimately will get the company to move the needle and get better. So from a business dependency perspective, I see HR growing. They're much more at the business table than they were ever before, not only at Fleetmatics, but really in a lot of different places. And those HR people who are truly administrative, and no offense to the financial and legal people in the world, because that's certainly important parts of HR, but those who only depend on having an answer because legally you have to do this or that, they're going to be left behind relative to business need. You have to be compliant. You have to make sure the trains run on time, but you also have to be truly valuable to the differentiator and kind of value prop for the company. And talent is typically one of the biggest value props the company is going to have.
And what about you?
Yeah, look, I think my perspective is that any function that moves from being, being a necessity to a decision-making function always gets the seat at the table. So the dramatic transformation that we're seeing in HR is because you started to have a function which is very, very decision-centric around people. So my vision on the team, on at least at Context Media, is how do we create, as a HR function, how do we help our organization, our leaders, our managers, our employees make very good people decisions every single day. That is the path for us to building a world-class company, right? I mean, I think you alluded to that in terms of making good decisions on talent. So if you extend that logic to all aspects of your org, you're making hundreds and thousands of micro decisions about people every single day. And the way you hire, who you hire, how you assess, onboard, rotate, promote, pay, compensate, reward, recognize, you just name it. It's all about making people decisions. And if you start to have a good decision-making framework, it's like accounting became finance. Finance became the most important part of the of the org in the 90s and the 2000s. What we're seeing today is pretty much the movement that HR is making from whatever you want to call it before it was to a very decision-based, a decision-focused function, and that's why the transformation is pretty dramatic.
Now, Namrata, you've seen this transformation from a very different perspective. So how is it seen? How have you seen it from your vantage point?
So in terms of diversity and inclusion, definitely seeing it evolve, especially with the millennials coming in. I won't say coming into the workforce because the oldest millennials is in their late 30s, so they're not kids right now. But having like the largest workforce being millennials currently, and which is supposed to grow to 50% by 2020, they've really changed the concept of diversity and inclusion. So it's not just race and gender. So diversity and inclusion is not about me, a woman, a person of color, an immigrant with an accent. It is truly about everyone and involving everyone in that dialogue. So what I've seen is really the dialogue around D&I is changing. Within Bank of America, we are moving to talking about candid dialogues, about the taboo topics like religion, racial relations, what's happening externally politically, what we are hearing. Because we realize when we say bring your whole selves to work, it's truly your whole self. You can't say, okay, when you walk in, don't talk about all of those things. So one of the things our CEO a couple of months ago asked us, so what does this bringing your whole self to work really mean? If you're a racist, misogynist, homophobic, sexist self, is that whole self, is that a self you can bring to work? Well, my answer is very clear, of course you can. As long as your ideas and viewpoints do not impact our clients or customers or associates, and you live by our values, which is respect. So, it's interesting, but that's the kind of dialogue we're having on a daily basis with leadership right now.
That is very different.
Very, very different.
So let's kind of dig into a little bit of what you guys are mentioning. I'm curious as to the roles. So you guys have talked a bit about the roles of HR or people operations in your organization. And I've had a number of conversations with the folks in the audience about this. And a lot of people are here because they're in that transformation themselves, almost going from a service organization to much more of a consultative, strategic organization. So I'd like for each of you maybe to go the next level deeper in terms of talking about what role do you see for your orgs in the company, and specifically, how did you come to it? And by that I mean, did you, in an offsite or series of meetings, come up with your own missions and values and what you wanted HR people to become? Was this something that you worked with the executive team, the rest of the executive team, or the CEOs on? How did sort of that role or that mission come into being? Because I think that's something a lot of people in the audience are working on right now. And anybody can jump in. I'm not sure if we have anybody who's tagged for this question.
All right.
It's a very shy panel tonight.
I can tell you, look, I took this job up 4 months ago, and I've been engaged with the founders and with Katie and the team for about eight months or so. The way, again, arrived at this was, number one, seeing if there's an alignment between what I believe strongly in how you build a world-class organization base, which is kind of formed by my experience in the last 10, 15 years in some two great companies. I just saw it right in front of my own eyes at Facebook. We were a couple of hundred people. I was employee number 5 in Asia, in Singapore, morphed itself into beating Google in terms of one of the best places to work, or at least competing with it head on in a span of less than 3 years. So there's a significant learning, and what happens is you kind of have a very strong point of view on what what HR and what the people leader needs to be doing to create that impact. So for me, it was more about, does my vision of creating a great workplace through decision making, through good people decisions, correlate with what the founders were doing, and what it's also important to know what's been done so far. If you look at when I came in, the team was already very well set. 300 amazing people that they'd hired. I mean, they had done it really well without a leader. So it was for me, now I got to add more value than what's already been created.
So, sorry.
No, you can go ahead.
Okay. So to talk a little bit about, I think positioning is extremely important, and not to sound cliche, but if you come in as, well, I'm the HR guy or gal, or I'm the HR professional, you start from the back seat ultimately, right? If you come in and you recognize that we are a business function, we're business leaders, and you start from there and you kind of grow your team that way, then everyone kind of comes in from that perspective. So as I had a chance to build a team, and I had to build it in a company where every manager had a ton of autonomy to make a lot of people-related decisions without the help of HR before I got there. So it's kind of coming in, well, how do we add value? How do we ultimately make that better? And how do we partner with them in a way that makes sense? They have to find value from it. So you first have to learn the business and understand and value what they breathe every single day, and know that you can have that conversation as a business leader. Secondly, you have to position yourself, and we did, from a position of leadership and not from a position of client service. So I'm sure many of you who are in HR functions call your business partners and managers and employees and so on your clients. And no offense to however you set up your organization, I hate that. Because the reality is client means serve to the client, make the client happy. And ultimately, you want everyone to be happy, but you also want to serve the mission of the organization as it relates to people. So if you have a hiring manager who isn't making the best decisions as it relates to talent, I expect my recruiter to help push and make those decisions with that hiring manager as a partner so that we get the best talent. So if you don't like that person, and I know that person is qualified for the role, well, you tell me why, right? And that helps us with diversity. That helps us with a lot of things relative to just kind of growing the business in the right way. And it's not easy at first. We had a lot of pushback, but at the end of the day, if there's value, the phone will ring again and you'll be invited back to the table. Ultimately, you have to determine whether there's value. If you're pushing your HR agenda and that's it, chances are they're not going to find a lot of value, and ultimately you'll kind of be stuck in that back office situation and not be called very often except when they have to.
Do you want one more? Can I comment? Okay. In terms of, again, going back to diversity and inclusion, it really does start at the top. So there has to be that leader engagement. And for us, I don't remember in my 8 years that I've had a conversation about what's the business case for diversity. We don't need to have that conversation anymore. That's the way we work. So that's just built in our DNA. But in terms of just the inclusion and the learning work that we're doing around this, it's nothing separate. It's part of everything we do. We integrated this work into the business. So think about a D&I training. You get an invite for that. What the hell would ever want to go for a D&I training? That's the last thing anybody ever wants to do, right? So those are the kind of conversation we started having, like, how do we really make this sexy now? How do we make this topic and this conversation cool and relevant? So we really changed the dialogue around that I was talking, but even the way we deliver some of the content has changed. It's like, most of my content that we deliver is like a talk show. Two people having coffee. So let's talk about race relations. Let's talk about religion. Let's talk about, gender diversity, what that means. Let's talk about straight, white, able men. What's their role in it? So it's really changing the dialogue completely in the way we deliver content. And what this has done is people are showing up month over month over month. We had 70,000 people this year. It's not mandatory. If they're finding it on our LMS and coming, we don't send any mandatory invites or anything like that. But people just want to show up and be part of the dialogue. It's like anything else externally. You want to show up on social media and talk about, this is what I believe in. That's exactly what we're trying to build internally with this work.
Can you talk a little bit about how you're building those partnerships with other senior executives? Because clearly it's woven into the fabric at the bank.
It's an expectation. So every direct report to our CEO, D&I is an expectation. So we have intense scorecards, we have quarterly meetings. So that piece is like very business driven. But this piece, what we've also done is nobody from my team or I deliver this content. So even if we are hosting a session, I get one of my CEO direct reports to host the session. So it's a business driven. So we call this a leaders teaching leaders faculty member who does this. So this is not my problem. This is everyone else's. So that's how we really do some of the work. So they're engaged from our front.
Excellent. So can you each, I mean, success is tough because in this role, we've never achieved success, right? Regardless of the folks on this table, we're always going to have new challenges in our organizations. There will be new metrics to try to hit. But today, how do you see success in your respective organizations, and how are you partnering? Are you partnering with the other business leaders in the organization to try to integrate with how they define success?
Sure, I'll start this. So I think it's interesting because at all the companies I've been a part of, culture is like the number one thing that we all focus on because it's really competitive, obviously, as we know, to attract and retain the right employees. So it's our number one goal is to really retain employees, I mean, at the end of the day. So what we can do to do that on a daily basis, if it's everything from perks and benefits to get them to learn and grow, to give them a career path. I think all of those things are super important. And for us, at the end of the day, when we work really, really hard to get the right people and recruit the right people, we want to retain them at the end of the day. So that's, everyone's involved in that. I mean, all of our executives, all of our managers, because we know that the cost that we would have to pay to either recruit and hire another employee or whatever that would be is far more than actually providing an awesome place to work, that people are truly engaged and they feel like they love to come to work and they want to learn and grow and all of those things. So I think for us, like how we really measure success is on that retention piece.
Others want to comment on how you measure success? How do we know if we're doing a good job as an organization?
I think it is because you just got a part, which is awesome. I have a slightly different take over here. For me, I believe culture is an outcome of what you focus to get to that point. Like there are, as an HR leader, you can be very busy doing many things because people in the company need you or need your team. But there are a couple of activities, a couple of inputs that have an outsized impact to whatever measure of success that you want to call a success. And for me, I have found, especially one is the science of assessment, not just the hiring piece, but in hiring, the way you assess talent and how you kind of build something unique about it is probably one of the most strategic activities that you should measure. The second one is how quickly you can, if you're young companies like the three of us out here, unlike, let's say, BOA, how can you quickly codify your manager behaviors, train managers to make sure that that is the way they need to lead, and measure how they're doing against those behaviors by asking the team, once in 6 months, et cetera, what would be the frequency, and use that as your North Star, because employees experience culture through the lens of their managers and their immediate team. So as a live example, we just released today, Katie and I released our first Gallup training that we're working with Gallup to not just put people through training. Our goal is to codify our 8 or 10 behaviors that's unique for context media health. Once we know that those are those behaviors, this is the greatest example out here, which is there on the web, is what Google did with Project Oxygen. You should absolutely go and Google Project Oxygen, which is about Google's management framework. It is spectacular, which is, for them, it is about what manager behaviors lead to high-performing teams. And then there is the philosophy around compensation, reward, and recognition. If you spend, I would say, more time on these three activities, it has an outsized impact. I'm sure there are a few others, and each one of us will have our own take to it, but it is important to prioritize. Otherwise, you can just be doing all sorts of stuff. And for me, these three have just been simply outsized in terms of the impact it has.
Excellent. Radha, what about your experience?
So I would say from a macro level, it is truly making sure Bank of America is a great place to work, where people really want to come and grow their careers. So all people, it's not just diverse talent or non-diverse talent. So I think that's the macro level. And as a brand, are we seen as that from our clients and customers, that we are standing up for the right things and our values? But from micro level, when I look at just programming specifically, so it's, is what we deliver, even if it's for all of our employees, is it impacting the performance, engagement, retention? Is it the recognition, the intent to stay? So we're actually measuring those pieces right now. And we're seeing extremely high correlation between our programming and those aspects. So that's like real success for us on a daily basis.
So I want to go back to something that you mentioned before about involving the line of business and the business leaders in the diversity and inclusion training. And we've seen a trend, not just in diversity and inclusion, but in having HR business partners attempt to get closer and closer to the business. So in similar conversations that we've had in other locations, we've talked about things like having more of the HR business partners actually co-locate with the businesses that they support. So, almost driving ways to integrate people further into the business. What's also come up in similar type panels is a lot of the younger employees in our teams, they're a little intimidated because they feel like they've come up and they understand the process of HR, but they may not understand the business and they're almost afraid to engage. And so I know this is off script a little bit, but it kind of your methodology for thinking about how do I make an impactful training session by bringing business leaders, maybe think of it. Have you guys witnessed or are you thinking about ways to make sure your teams are really steeped in the reality of the business? And to what extent are you trying to fight over across, especially for the early tenure employees, maybe a little bit of hesitation and confidence of, do I really know enough to speak with a senior leader in the organization?
So that's a great question. So I think one of the places is because we're involving the senior leaders in these dialogues, and what we also do is actually tell them you need to be vulnerable when you're having these dialogues. Be honest. Talk about where you've screwed up or where you've not screwed up. Talk about your own biases. So for instance, unconscious biases. And I've heard stuff like, I'm biased when I hear an accent on a phone. I'm biased about that. I've heard stuff, and this is honest. So these are leaders sharing, these are my biases, and I'm being honest. This is how I'm managing them. And these are some tips you can do it. We are not trying to create a bias-free environment because we cannot create a bias-free environment. That's real, but we can manage it. But I think when you start talking in a very vulnerable human way, you see people showing up and standing up and asking questions which are so not scripted and like, oh, what does a forecast look for next quarter? So we don't see those kind of questions. We're actually seeing the way people are even asking questions. So we have young leaders coming in and asking our CEO directly, so what's your development strength look like? What are you working on? How do you rate yourself as a leader? We had never seen that happen. But I think the culture is changing where we are allowing some courageous conversations to happen, that we see people are speaking up and actually voicing their opinions. And it's like on a regular basis we see that.
And that's when we start to see culture change.
Exactly.
Alyssa, I'm curious in your organization where, I mean, it still can be so small relatively, right? Where everybody, to a certain extent, probably sits together, but there can be a tribalization in HR and almost a reluctance to engage in the business. I guess first, have you seen that trend in the roles that you've had, and how can we as HR leaders overcome that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, we all sit really, really close together, like in the same room, too close.
So you hear everything.
We're really growing out of our space. But I think, because we are a smaller organization, people probably feel like our CEO is more accessible because he's sitting right there with everybody. So I feel like we're able to communicate fairly well. However, I do think when you're a growing company and things are changing every day, and some of the earlier employees that maybe have been there since the beginning, and they're like, what about me? Like, I used to only be one of 8, now I'm one of 130, and I think that you see that naturally happen. And so I think it's just, again, really important from an HR perspective is to really start developing like programs and plans and things to like really keep all those people engaged. Like I mentioned, retention is like what we really focus on, and making myself and everybody accessible so that if you ever do have a concern or anything like that, I mean, I sit again like 2 seats away, like let's go chat about it, and really creating that open door policy from day one and really intertwining that into your culture from day one, I think is really important, as I've seen different companies grow, and that as open and authentic as you can make your culture, then I think people just naturally, like even, as you were saying, like that's just, if you can be honest and open, then people are going to respond and also be honest and open themselves. So I think that's our job as leaders, is to really create that and make sure that we hold people accountable to that as well.
So we've spoken a bit about the trends that have got us here, but I'm curious for each of your opinions about where we go from here. So if the question of last year was about performance reviews and performance management, do they mean anything? Do we do them? Do we move to bi-weekly check-ins? Where do you see the major conversations over the next 5 years, and how do you see this function transforming? And how are you thinking about preparing your organizations for that transformation? Alyssa, do you want to start with you?
Sure. So I think, again, I mentioned this earlier, I think it's the reactive versus proactive, and being ahead of everything and developing those things that are unique to your company that makes it a place, again, that people want to be every day and that people really connect with. And so I think, again, from my perspective, it's seeing just different companies grow, and companies are always different, but as long as you're true to your culture and maintaining those values that attracted people in the first place, I think that's really important. And again, as we grow, I think in the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to see our roles change even more. And as we've seen them change over the last 5 to 10 years. And I think, again, like I'm sure we're all here, we're very passionate about people. That's what got me into my career, I'm able to have a career out of helping people and working with people directly. And so I think that's always going to be at our core. But as we move forward, it's like, how do we continue to stay ahead of the game? How do we engage our people? How do we, get our executives on board from day one? And how do we continue growing our cultures and moving ourselves forward, I guess, if that makes sense.
Jorge, what about you? Where is this function going?
Oh God, so many places. So I would say, look, the fundamentals don't change. You're still going to always want to hire great people, retain great people. They're always going to want feedback. They're always going to want to be developed. Those things don't change no matter what. The reality, what changes is the dynamics around us, whether it be related to demographics or technology. So I'll talk about both. Demographics, 15 years ago, they used to talk about the talent wars, and they say that, look, the amount of people coming into the workplace is less than the amount of people leaving the workplace. And that we're going to have this huge talent war. It's going to become an employee market and so on. And then this huge series of recessions came into play, and all these people that wanted to retire couldn't retire, and so they stayed in the workplace. We really haven't seen that dynamic until probably now. And we'll start to see that dynamic of more and more people wanting to, more people, kind of more companies fighting over that talent as it comes in. So I think the dynamic's going to change significantly as you look at that. And so the whole aspect of job search and job placement and so on, today we post jobs, we pay for jobs, we're basically with our advertisements, right? The reality is I see that dynamic changing more to balance the scales, where it's not necessarily employer-based, but more like a dating site. And I kind of joke about it, but right now the hiring process is like a blind date, right? You got enough information, but you're going to show up. You're not going to learn more until you get into the interview process. Maybe there's a little bit on their website. You learn a little bit about their culture, what they say about themselves, right? What if you have your ability to put your profile out there as a candidate, and a company has to put a lot of transparency about themselves and their culture, and then there's no date unless there's a match, right? I don't know if it's a eHarmony or something like that, but the reality is that's definitely...
I smell a startup right here. I smell it.
Come on, guys, I need the technology now. I'm not the techie, just have a good idea. But that's the opportunity, ultimately. And the reality, the other thing is, technology does make things fast. So I think the whole aspect of just the annual basis for anything, not just performance reviews, is just not going to continue. Maybe for public companies and when they report their annual reviews or the annual results, but the reality is it's too long. Everything changes in a year. So I think quarterly cycles for bonus, for performance, for all the things that we need, constant feedback, constant resetting of goals, and so on, is I think where the future is gonna look like. This whole kind of what happens in January, whether you do performance reviews or not, right? This whole aspect of let's set goals for bonus targets for the year, I think that's gonna go away and gonna start to become a lot more iterations, more simple, because technology helped, but at the end of the day, a constant movement, because that's the way everything, we're gonna be forced that way.
Mod, what about you? Where is this function going?
So I believe that we're going to have a massive change, and let me back it up with data. There's a societal change happening right now. All of us are experiencing what I call as the fourth industrial revolution, right? Mobile, digital, AI, machine learning, sensor technology. If you came in an Uber today, you did all of this right now. So what it does, if you were to take the societal change that is happening right now, is it democratizes everything. Democratizes access, democratizes information. It creates a level playing field, which is what the dream of the internet was. What does it do for our function? What it does for our function is it creates a winner-take-all in many of these industries. So what it does for our function is, I mean, looking at the fact that all employees that you hire or all people that you hire, you have so much access to information, technology, et cetera, you are going to be forced to drive deep differentiation between those people who have created great impact and the ones who just show up. So, and you will start seeing organizations becoming smaller and smaller. I mean, look at Facebook today, right? 14,000 employees, that's it, for a $30 billion company. And many of the companies, you take Uber, take any of these companies, the rate at which their employee growth compared and the rate at which their revenue growth is totally asymmetric. And if you look at what's happening today, even though the actual dollar value of what the enterprise is worth is like almost 40% more than it was in the 90s, the jobs are actually created much lesser than what it was in the 90s. So they're just scary. So when you have a society which is creating incredible wealth for a few people, for a few organizations, and where we are right in the middle of that change, where they will look to the HR function to figure out what it means for orgs. You will, I mean, I'm sure you will still have big organizations, but in the tsunami of all this change, I think the big ones, banking, healthcare, education, energy, and transportation, are the big industries to start to really break up. And we're seeing it in almost every function, every industry. If you look at Tesla today, for example, it's no longer a car company. It's a company which is in the energy business. And again, there are a few thousand people with billions of dollars of market cap, and there are very few other Teslas. So it's a big shift, and I think it will be painful. And we will need to actually lead that conversation on how to create or to spread the wealth across to people who don't make those jobs.
It's a lot to think about. So last question before we turn it over to audience questions. So think about follow-up questions you want to ask. I want to pull on a couple threads that have come up. We talked about this millennial cohort entering the workforce. To some extent, this is just simply the next batch of 20-something and early 30-somethings, and this happens every generation. To another extent, there's different expectations. Expectations around personal development, expectations around career development. I think Alyssa also mentioned, about the focusing on how do we ensure that we're retaining all the talent that we're building our employer brand to try to bring in, and we hire and we choose so carefully. How do we make sure that we're developing those people so they stay with us? So I'm curious if, and Jorge, maybe we can start with you, if you can speak to the way your organization thinks about developing people. How do you ensure that people are developing the skills they need and progressing in the way that they want to in their career?
Sure. So it helps when you're growing, right? When you have a fast-growing company, the career opportunities come naturally through growth because someone's got to grow. Someone's got to take that responsibility, and someone's got to backfill that person. At the end of the day, you as an HR function need to help make sure that just the information is out there on how to pursue that roadmap. And if you want new employees, in particular millennials, to stay with the company, you got to give that visibility to that roadmap very early on. Let me tell you what this might look like. It might have a variety of different paths, but let me tell you what it might look like so you understand. Now, ultimately, as an HR function, you should never manage people's careers, but you should definitely make the information available to people so they know how to develop, and then allow them the opportunity to get the resources, like Udemy for Business. You don't have to pay me for that plug, but use whatever resources you have for people to develop themselves and identify the opportunity to kind of get there. This is the roadmap. This is kind of what we need. Now, you individual can we're going to give you some resources, but now you drive it, and ultimately that's I think that's fairly basic. I don't think it's changed that much, but technology certainly enables it.
Any other thoughts on development? I mean, it is such an expectation today in the organization.
So I can talk about Bank of America. So for us, when you talked about millennials, yes, there are different expectations, but they're not very different what we are finding from every other generation. So what we have done is really modernized our learning, the way we offer learning. It's 99% is virtual. We're getting away from these in-person. So from a development perspective, we are really, and that's coming from millennial feedback. We want minute-long videos to nothing more than 60 minutes, and let's make it relevant, bring in best-selling authors, TED Talk speakers, make it cool. So we're doing all of that. But what we're actually finding when we do something like that, all the generations love it. And I think it's like disability. When the ADA regulation went into place, it was for people with disabilities, but who benefited? Someone like me with a stroller. I use those ramps all the time, right? It's the same thing. We are doing a lot of work because it's coming from millennials, but we're finding everybody uses it. Whether it's benefits, whether it's flexible time, whether it's working from home, we find more retirees doing that than millennials right now. So it's pretty interesting. So I do think, from a development perspective, that's something we have changed learning. And the way we talk about growth and development, it doesn't need to be vertical. So it's really thinking horizontal growth and what that looks like. So that's a lot of conversation we are having currently.
Excellent. Well, please join me in thanking our panel. We're going to move from this stage. Thank you. It's a great conversation. We're going to pass around the microphones. We're going to have two, so look for our two microphone holders. And please ask questions of the panel. And I don't get to talk anymore.
Hello, my name's Miles O'Hara, and I'm with a company called Prescient, and this is my favorite colleague,
Alicia.
And basically, we've never been in HR before. We've never done anything with HR. But as a startup, we currently have like 40 employees. What are some of your recommendations and like first steps in sort of creating an HR process? We're totally new at it. It's our company started on the whole federal side of government where you're contracting, where basically get people to do somebody else's job, and they're never really involved with our company as much. And right now we're sort of just creating our commercial business, and one of our main focuses is trying to retain employees, and it's how do you start all that? I don't know. Thank you.
So I'll give you my 2 cents. It would be helpful if, for whatever time you get big enough to hire an HR professional to be part of your organization, it'll be helpful for your organization and for that person if you're able to articulate the employee experience that you want to happen within your organization. So the basis of values and principles that you want to drive by, which will ultimately establish your culture, and people naturally, if you get the right people to come to culture, they'll naturally work the way you want them to. The rest is just process and stuff, right? You can figure that out, and someone can help you when you get big enough to do that. But if you develop that foundation, then your HR person comes in and you gave them a gift, right? And now they can help you with the process and stuff and scaling.
Look, my advice would be just focus the heck out of hiring. Just be so focused on trying to find the best talent, defining what hiring process will work for you. Because all the culture piece and how you grow a great company, et cetera, is going to follow success. If you hire exceptionally smart people who, as Jorge said, are close to your values, but also not just on the values piece, but you develop a hiring methodology that you end up getting an A++ player every single time, your clients are going to be delighted. That will mean your business will grow. That will mean you will get more people, and it's kind of a self-fulfilling positive cycle. And if you just assume that hiring will be done by the two of you, you interview morning, you interview in the evening, yeah, I think it's good, he's going to fix it, you're going to kill your company as you grow. So my learning on this just came from, in '97, you should read up what Jeff Bezos did on creating a process called the bar raiser process. It's available on the internet. He was, about 100 people at Amazon. He just got obsessed about hiring. And that was one of the only things that he focuses on today in HR is just hiring, nothing else. The rest of the stuff other people do for him.
Hi, my name is Stella Shaolu, and I am a founder of a company called WeSolve here at 1871. And just to give you a little bit of context, about 2 weeks ago, I was actually on the stage, and I delivered a talk about ending the cycle of insanity. And it was really focused on talking about how HR and companies continue to do the same thing over and over again. Prior to starting WeSolve, I led engagements at Gallup with a lot of Fortune 500 companies. And so my question to you is, for the startups, how much of a priority is diversity when you're thinking about just trying to grow and sustain, your growth and the business? And then for the more established companies, what are the innovative solutions or ways that you're trying to attract diversity? Because as most of us know, a lot of companies are struggling with D&I. We're talking about the top companies as well as, companies below them. What are some of the innovative or new things that you're trying to really attain more diverse talent, and more specifically, the right talent?
I can start with that. I think one of the things that we, especially being such a large company, such an established company, we tend to go to the same places to hire talent from, year over year over year. And we realize all of our peers are going to the same place, and we're fighting for the same people. So what we're really doing is, changing that. So we're looking at a way more, diverse range of schools that we go to. So that's one of the things we do from a recruiting perspective for our new hires. But in terms of, I think for a startup, I haven't worked for a startup, so it's a very tough thing for me to say, but I think you should hire, this is what we tell our hiring managers, hire someone different from you. Because we all look for the same thing, that, we can bond, or something you say, Chicago Cubs, I love Chicago Cubs, hey, great. That's the only thing you will remember in the interview. But really hire someone different from you. Push yourself. It's not easy. I hired someone yesterday, she's completely different from me. I was making jokes, she wasn't smiling. I'm like, are you kidding me? But I realized I needed that. And look at your own strengths. What don't you have? I know I'm not detailed oriented. I know I can't think, I'm always here. I need someone to ground me and say, where the hell are you? Come back down. But what I was tending to do was I get attracted to people who are also here. So you really need to push yourself and hire someone who's completely different. Maybe you don't get along with them, but trust me, it just makes the dynamics so much better. It makes you think. So I would say the startup, look at that, definitely. Sure.
I wasn't asking for myself as a startup.
Oh, okay.
My startup
Sorry.
is actually focused on connecting diverse students to each other and then to companies to solve real business challenges and allow them to
Perfect.
use that as a more effective, less biased way to vet and engage those students. So my question was to you, literally, like, what are your organizations doing that's different in terms of trying to hire more diverse students? And then I said for the startups, what is that priority on diversity for you?
So one quick thing I would add, so there is an initiative that we actually joined recently in Chicago market. So I can talk about that. It's called the Financial Services Pipeline. It's been led by the Fed Reserve. So I'm part of the steering committee. There's 16 firms joined that, and that's exactly, it's looking at bringing in African American and Latino talent into financial services and solving this issue as a whole. So looking at high schools, looking at even middle schools and going there and doing financial literacy, talking about career paths in finances. So that's something we've never done before. And I can definitely talk about that more in detail with you.
My name is Alicia. I want to know, because we're talking about, we got Bank of America, B of A over here. We have, some startup tech companies. I come from a public sector industry, so I work for a nonprofit. We are very financial restricted with our resources, and the staff and the talent pool we have are not those people coming out of school getting their degree. We have entry-level, bare minimum jobs. How are we to cultivate the talent to get them to work for? That's always been a challenge for nonprofits. So I know you guys may have never worked in nonprofit, but what do you think would be some good ideas for engaging our people? Because what I noticed and what I've seen in different seminars, if their basic level needs are not met in that Maslow hierarchy of needs, that's always their issue. And if they're not making enough money, they're working another job. So they have and these people are working 2 and 3 jobs to make a minimum wage. So they're not engaged at work because they're coming to make the money. So how do we engage them?
So I'll make a couple of comments. I'm on the board of a nonprofit called the National Latino Education Institute, and they have the same issue, hiring talent. And the reality is because they can't pay a lot. Mission-driven work, you can't underestimate the value of mission-driven work in for-profit or nonprofit. people want to do something. Now, you totally get the Maslow's hierarchy and the kind of basic needs that people have. But at the end of the day, if you think about, you said you didn't hire people right out of school. Look at social entrepreneurship programs that exist within really great schools where people come out of school looking for nonprofits for work. They're not looking for the paycheck from that perspective. They're looking for something meaningful to work and to contribute, and they're pretty smart. So I'd start there, because once you get a sort of reputation of hiring talented people with mission-driven work, word spreads, right? You can't underestimate the whole value of Net Promoter Score and positive reviews from that perspective. So my 2 cents.
Hi, I'm Mary Kay McMahon from Peloton Partners, which is an HR consulting and talent management firm. And the question I have for all of you is, you know, there's obviously a lot of talk and a lot of press focused on the gig economy and the evolution of organizations to what will be a more predominantly sort of project-based form of employment. So with that said, and particularly given the fact that a number of you really focus on IT skill sets, but not limited to IT skill sets, what are your organizations doing to prepare for this gig economy orientation in terms of rethinking the way people are compensated, employment agreements, benefits, et cetera? And do you believe it's going to occur?
It's a great question, thank you. I think you're going to have, in my view, model something like this, where you have a core set of employees, and the talent model will be automate. If you can automate, outsource. If you can outsource, contract. And if you still can't do this, and only then you will hire full-time employees. And that's why I believe, we're going to see a significant reduction in just the total number of people employed full-time. So I think preparing organizations or preparing employees in the organization for a massive change where they could potentially get outsourced, contracted, or gigged, where they go from being a full-time employee to an hourly employee, I think is a big challenge for all of us. Again, you will follow the same, what I call the power law distribution, where your top employees, who are going to be gigged are going to be taken care of differently than the ones whose skill sets are going to be dispensable. That is what a capital market is going to do. I'm not saying that is the right thing and that we have no heart, et cetera, but that is what a fully functional capital market will do. So I think helping employees understand that the only way to truly have a job that will continue to grow is the impact that you can make. And the impact comes from being very innovative, being bold, and moving the needle for the company would be a better way to start. And the ones who are going down the other path, whether even you're making impact for whatever reason that the company is not able to kind of sustain that workforce, is to start to figure out how do you retain the best of your best. I think your question, Alicia, I'll just tie up those two, on saying if you were in a nonprofit setup, which you could kind of say that you're not being paid, et cetera, what could you do on one thing that will make those people come to work? Can you think of your benefits slightly differently? Can you think of serving breakfast in the morning where you kind of work with another nonprofit which is helping build such things? So you have to find something very unique in the gig economy or in the economy where you have the rates which are not very high to attract these people.
It's interesting. We've done a bit of research on the gig economy as well, and it went into looking at how and why people learn online. So it looks at our data. But what was interesting is we talk a lot about the gig economy in terms of contract workers and outsourcing the rest, and that's certainly I think a huge element. A lot of our research found that there's a huge amount of the gig economy happening even among fully employed individuals. All right, so this gets at this notion that business is changing so fast. I might have been for instance, a Java developer, now I'm a React developer, and I'm working on a totally different project. And in 9 months, I'm gonna be working on something else entirely. And so it might still be a full-time employee for the time being, but the way people are working is much more looking gig-based, necessarily, okay, I know what the next 5 years of my career are gonna look like, and therefore I can prepare for that. So when we think about product development, we wanna make sure that where they're, as people are thrown into something that's completely different that they've never done before, that they can prepare themselves and teach themselves so they're able to perform.
Hi, I just want to thank you guys for a wonderful panel tonight. I'm Matthew Miller. I'm from Founder Equity. One of the things I found very interesting tonight was as you were talking about culture and community, and specifically in relation to absenteeism, especially prolonged absenteeism in relation to health issues. Do you have any tips, tricks, or tools for maintaining that culture and community when somebody's out for a period of time?
And,
Go ahead.
I think you have to have a definition of what absence means in your company, and how are you going to support that? Because absence has different dimensions. It could be for health, it could be for taking care of somebody in a family, it could be for paternity, maternity reason, it could be accident related, etc. It is very hard to do it in a very capitalistic economy without the support of a strong insurance broker that will pay for all of this long-term absenteeism or absenteeism beyond one's control if you don't have some kind of a really strong benefit or your insurance program written in where somebody else pays for it once you kind of hit that time. But then you can start to think about saying, is absenteeism is more to do with the fact the person can't show up? Because today it's so flat, you can work from home, you can find ways to still be productive while you might not really be in the office. So I would kind of explore that first, but also be very thoughtful on how to look at leaves of absence. And that itself is a very specialized category, because I think we have 10 or 12 different leaves of absence, right from paternity, maternity, short-term, health, sick, vacation, taking care of your parents, and the list goes on. And I think just defining that would be a good start, and then trying to look at those people who are missing it beyond their control. How can you kind of keep them productive might be a better way to do that.
Just, I would say relative to that, so that's really hard to do, right? You got to get managers to kind of buy into to what they're doing, and ultimately, if you're a meritocracy type of organization, the person, Kyle Schwarber gets knee surgery and is out for a while. He's really welcomed back with great esteem when he comes back to the plate, right? But ultimately, if someone didn't establish that value within the organization, and then they're out, I think there's less empathy within an organization, and that's hard to develop. But I think what you want to do ultimately is have your managers understand that what they do for their employees when they're out, everybody sees, right? Not just the employee that has that impact, but everybody sees. So if they know that that person's worth their kind of value, and then you're giving them flexibility when they're having tough times, everybody sees, because they know when I got a tough time, I got a manager who ultimately is going to understand that builds great value and engagement within the organization. Now, if there's less flexibility when someone hasn't really earned that, the not so good performer who may be potentially abusing the situation or just have a lot of issues, that I don't have an answer for, because ultimately, you are trying to drive a meritocracy in most companies.
I think we have time for one more question.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Dhriti, and I run a software company focused on employee engagement. And one of the reasons I actually started my company was I read a Gallup study that 70% of workers are either actively disengaged or not actively engaged in the workforce, which is just a huge number. So I was just wondering if I could get your perspective. How do we think about this problem? How do we frame it? How do we study it? And how do we ultimately attempt to go about solving it?
So I think obviously engagement is one of the number one things. Again, going back to attracting and retaining employees, and I think the communication piece is so huge. So consistently getting feedback in whatever way makes sense for your company, or giving people the ability to give feedback. If it's a conversation with you or any of the executives, to always providing ways for them to submit questions or whatever that is, and making it very comfortable. Like, for example, at Spot Hero, we do all team meetings once a month, and we have a form where people can submit anonymous questions or whatever they want to submit, or comments, and we read that, in front of everybody, and we answer the questions, like every single question that would come in, and there have been some interesting questions. But I think that is, again, just allowing people or giving people the ways to give consistent feedback is super important, and it has been for me in all of my organizations.
So at Bank of America, we do have a very intense employee engagement process. When we annual surveys, and we take it really seriously. All of our lives are like, and each business takes it very seriously. So we look at that, that's one piece, but we started asking like what really inspires people to come in and motivates people. So we came down to some fundamental stuff like it's the work I do, it's the people I work with, benefits I receive, brand I'm a part of, and the development I get. And we're looking at this from that angle. So, you know, when you think of work, is it equitable distribution of work? Is it easily accessible? Are roles available from a transparent perspective? So, you know, again, from people, are we real trust and transparency, so creating that culture with some of the dialogues we're having. Brand benefits is huge. Brand is so big for our millennials right now. Am I working for a company which aligns with my values? Is the company standing up for the right things? We know millennials are more socially more liberal, and they want their brand to stand up, right? So we are looking at it from that perspective. So what really engages people, and are we doing all of those things?
So I have a quick comment, and this is not something we're doing, but it's a revelation recently, so I'll share it with you. Because we have a pretty high engagement score, not to brag or anything, but we're like 80% engagement and the engagement surveys we've had. But we always focus on that percentage of people that answers the negative, responses, the disagree and strongly disagree to those questions that we measure in the engagement. You know, the formula, 4 or 5 questions that matter, right? And why is it that we only focus on the problem issues instead of really leveraging? Why is the 80% of the people answering positively to that and kind of tilting the view? And maybe the reality is those are people that are just not a great fit ultimately, or we're not spending enough, we're spending too much time trying to solve those problems versus leveraging those strengths that we have. So I haven't solved for that. It's just a revelation in my own mind that I think we've started to think about it differently.
Well, please join me one more time in thanking our panelists. This was a great evening.